you, everyone, and welcome to the hopefully helpful portion for looking at our data and what data we're going to be asking you to collect each year. And so if you could access those resources, I'm going to be referring to the data collection timeline document and the spreadsheet template as we go through. So I'm totally fine if you're not paying any attention in a couple of minutes to the slides, because it'll be helpful to be looking at the spreadsheet and those documents as we go along. And Dr. J is collecting the questions that you're putting into the chat, and we'll make sure that we get to all of those at the end of our presentation. We want to make sure you have all your questions answered. And just quickly, I wanted to piggyback on what Christina said about her experience, my experience. I started teaching special education in the early 90s. And my first classroom was in a rural Indiana district where I had a self-contained grades 7 through 12 classroom for mild mod students. And I had 21 preps a day, if you counted all of the different levels of language arts and math and science and everything that I had to teach. And I remember going home the first day I found out what my placement was going to be, and I just cried. I had no idea how I was going to do 21 preps a day. And I couldn't imagine what I had gotten myself into. And I can only imagine what a residency placement would have done to help me prepare for that kind of situation. So I agree, this model is really powerful. And when we read the grant applications, we're so excited to see all of this amazing work going on in the state. So know that what you're doing is having a positive impact on teachers. So super excited to be involved in this work. All right, so let's talk about data. This isn't exciting necessarily, but as Christina mentioned, is really important for a lot of different reasons. We have to report to the commission and the state about how these funds are being used. And this data is really a process also for you to have that continuous improvement as you look at your data and see what kinds of things need to be addressed. So, all right, so when can you start collecting data? Now. You can start immediately. As soon as you have your program up and running is when you can start collecting this data. So as soon as your residents enroll, start working on getting those seed numbers. And we have a document I'm going to talk about in just a moment that walks through how you can get those seed numbers. I know it can be a little complicated, so we put together a guidance document for you. Seed numbers mean that a resident has a certificate of clearance, which allows them to be in the classroom with pupils. So obviously it's really important that you know that your candidates have that clearance and that they have that seed number. You can also collect data. You should be collecting data ongoing as clinical placements are made, residents are placed, tests are passed, recommendations are submitted to the commission. Your residents complete induction, they exit the program either on time or early or what have you. So basically, as you see the timeline document that we put together for you, there's something you could be doing for data collection every month of the year. So we've put together this document to help you kind of have a plan so that you don't get to June and you're like, oh no, our report to CTC is due in a couple of weeks, and you start frantically trying to gather this data, which is a lot and it's complicated. And if you wait until the end, like some of our students wait until the night before to write their paper, it's not going to get done on time because there's just too many moving pieces to collect. We encourage you to continually revisit previous cohort data and update that as well. And that's in our timeline guidance document too. And we're going to be walking through those documents in just a minute here. So how can you go about collecting the data that you need? We really recommend at the beginning of the academic year or now, if you haven't done so already, programs should identify which data will be collected by your IHE partner, which data you'll need to get from site administrators, from human resources, from program leaders, from induction coordinators. Like there's a lot of different information that you need to collect from many different sources. So it's helpful to look at the spreadsheet and brainstorm with your team. Okay, who's going to have to provide this data? Who's that key person? Who is that HR person that we need to collect this information from? Who's the person at our IHE partner that we should be contacting to get this information? So establish a plan for where the data is going to come from and who can be your contact person for that would be really helpful, instead of, again, trying to figure that all out at the end. And like I mentioned, we have that document that provides information about suggestions about how to collect those all important seed numbers. Next slide, please. So you will be getting this slide deck, and it takes you to a link on the CTC website on the teacher residency grants page. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom, we have under additional resources, we have this seed number lookup reference document. I'm not going to go there right now because you can walk through the information. It's step-by-step with screenshots about how you can, the person who has access to the system, how they can get the seed numbers that you're going to need for both your residents and your mentor teachers. You need to have seed numbers for both of those. So again, identify who that person is who has access to get those seed numbers, provide them with the document that we put together, and that should hopefully streamline the process. We know a lot of our grantees, when we got to the reporting phase, are like, I can't get the seed numbers, I don't know where to get them. So hopefully this streamlines that process for you. Next slide. So we have created a new clickable PDF data collection timeline checklist, and that is in your resource packet that they provided the link for in the chat for you. So we're going to be walking through that here in just a minute. This is also going to be emailed to all teacher residency grantees. There's a separate version for 2021 and 2018 grantees. All of the check boxes are the same, but some of the information at the top is a little bit different. Christina mentioned how we're working with our IT staff to develop an online system. And so it explains that and also talks about how some of the categories may be slightly different and how you can address that. So make sure you're working with the correct timeline document. We encourage you, it's not required again, but we encourage you to use this document to help you and your grant team members, your IEG partners, to keep on track of what data can be collected throughout the academic year for your annual report spreadsheet. All right, so let's dive into this lovely document here. And if you could let me know how much time so that I make sure I get to the end, that would be appreciated. So I'm assuming that you have in front of you the spreadsheet, because otherwise these columns may seem a little confusing or a little overwhelming. And so I'm going to have my spreadsheet open in front of me as well as we go through. If you'll notice on the spreadsheet, there are various tabs down at the bottom, and hopefully you're familiar with how Excel spreadsheets work. So there's different tabs. There's the instructions page, which is just a broad overview of the data collection spreadsheet. Then you'll see a program enrollment tab, program completion, resident funding grant, resident funding matching funds. And then you have tabs for years 1, 2, and so on of your residency program. So we're going to start back in September, October. We're thinking about the entire, academic year, what you could be starting with back in September and October. So obviously we're in January, so you can go back and look at the prior months and see what kind of information you could start gathering right now. So obviously column A in your program enrollment tab, you could be collecting your residents' names, their seed numbers, their enrolled date when they started in the residency program. And then column D, expected completion. So when do you anticipate, if everything goes according to plan, when will this resident be able to complete their program? And we put a note in there in terms of what enrollment and completion means for us. So enrollment is the date when residents are placed in their mentor's classroom or when they begin receiving grant funded support. And then for us, completion is defined as the date the program expects them to earn a preliminary teaching credential. So hopefully that clarifies what we're looking for in terms of those dates on the spreadsheet. And someone asked in the chat if there are any checkpoints before the June due date. No, we just hope that you're collecting your data as you go along. We may hold some office hours here in the spring at some point, but we're leaving it up to you as a grantee to keep track of your data and get your data submitted when we have those annual reports due in the summer. You can also, at the beginning of your academic year, fill in just some basic demographic information like your IEG name and the credential program as well. Next slide. Also in September and October, you can gather more demographic information about your candidates. You can fill in column G, their race and ethnicity, their mentor's name, which mentor classroom they've been placed in, and then the clinical placement mentor seed number as well. And again, I just reiterated that we have that seed number lookup document available for you. So that's September, October. Moving into November and December. And just as a reminder, the spreadsheet is designed to transfer names once you've entered them in the program enrollment tab. It should transfer them to all other tabs in the spreadsheet. So if you haven't gone in and altered cells, hopefully the names, you won't have to retype the names from sheet to sheet. We did that so that there weren't any copying and pasting errors. So now's a good time, November, December, to check to see if that transfer and automatic data population occurred for the other tabs, the program completion, resident funding for your grant funds, resident funding for your matching funds, and the years 1 through 4 tabs. Also in November and December, oops, stay on that slide, please. Thank you. Also in November in the program enrollment tab, you can fill in any missing seed numbers for candidates. You can start filling in column J, which is the clinical placement for your resident, the grade level and subject area. Column K in program enrollment, which is your clinical placement, the CDS code for the school. And column L, the clinical placement LEA school of residency. So just, hopefully you have your residence placed and you're able to put that information into that program enrollment tab. Right, next slide. Also in November and December, in your program completion tab, you could complete the credential program and the TPA type, which is columns B and C for program completion. And so as Christina mentioned, we now have an Ed Specialist TPA, so we need to make sure that our Ed Specialist candidates are preparing for and completing that TPA. Moving on to the resident funding for the grants tab. For this tab, you can complete column B, enter the enrolled date for your candidates. Column C, if you have any candidates who ended up exiting the program, you can enter that only if it's applicable. And then as Bakersfield mentioned, they keep constant track of how their grant funds are being spent. I was really happy to hear that, warmed the cockles of my heart. So, and we're recommending that as well. November, December, start tracking how your funds are being dispersed. If you wait until the end, it's going to be really difficult to go back and recreate where, it may be difficult to go back and recreate where those funds were spent. So highly recommend doing that as you go along. And then in the resident funding in your grants matching tab, same thing. Column B, enrolled, column C, any early exiters. And then as we do with your grant funds, keep track of your matching funds as well as you go along so that you're not trying to figure that out at the end. Also in November and December in your year 1 teaching tab, so this is where all your residents are listed, we recommend completing the following for residents in the program. So the hire date, if they were hired, the LEA name, the reason for LEA change or transfer if they ended up moving to a different district, column E, the school name, column F, the school CDS code, and column G, the grade level and subject area. Christina, did you want to add anything about the year 1 teaching tab?
I think this is where we start really seeing where data isn't consistent about a candidate all the way through. We're seeing things they've been recommended for things that they're not eligible for according to other data from previous tabs. So this is kind of where it's once you're starting to hire the folks, make sure to go back and revisit them on previous tabs to see if everything is accurate there.
Right, next slide. All right, moving into January and February. This is where we start revisiting some of the previous areas that we filled in just to make sure if there were things that were missing or residents weren't placed yet or things like that, that we're just going back and making sure that everything is filled in that needs to be filled in. So going back and filling in information about any additional funds that are spent from the grant, any additional funds that have been spent on the matching, program enrollment, program completion, and then years 1 through 4 as applicable. In February, again, going back to those years 1 through 4 teaching tabs and completing columns I through L, which is the LEA school placement and the characteristics. The resident, again, continuing to update your resident funding tab and your resident matching funds tab. And then as folks maybe start to complete or finish things such as their TPA, their basic subject, RECA, things like that. Now's the opportunity to start working on that. So in the program completion tab, looking at columns C through H and adding in any of that information. And this is where some of that information you're going to be getting from your IET partner. So that's why having good communication and ongoing communication with your IET partner, their credential analysts and so on is going to be really important. So someone asked in the chat, did we want to deal with these questions now or answer them all at the end?
You can answer them if it's part of the slide, and then we also are collecting them for the end.
Okay. So someone asked, please speak to the frequency of reporting requirements. So this spreadsheet is going to be due every July. And so we will, send out reminder emails in the spring, but the completed spreadsheet is always going to be due in July. And so keep that in mind because, schools finish and people go on vacation and, we run into issues with folks not being around to answer the questions that are needed to be answered on the spreadsheet. So that's why we really encourage you to be collecting this information as the year goes on so that you don't run into people not being available during the summertime to get you the information that you need. So every year this will be required. And then Christina, can you maybe answer the question, how do we indicate when someone is recommended for the preliminary, but with the code on CTC that they still need to complete requirements such as deferment because of COVID?
So there are categories for being recommended for a preliminary credential while other requirements have not been met. Like there's a code for being recommended for a preliminary with the RECA code on somebody's credential. So there are those options. If the option is not available for a specific scenario that you have, we do a lot of communicating in the far right columns of tabs. So when you send us the spreadsheet, you could type into that tab, see column V, which might be the last column that doesn't have an official title on it. It's kind of an empty column. You can put an additional note there. We also oftentimes have a notes column. So any special case scenarios, you just kind of type out the notes there, and that's a place that we communicate about individual residents. There was another question about the different, something that I spoke about earlier, the difference between a funding category and a line item. Basically, there's people refer to them as all different names, but looking at your Appendix G that you submitted with your application, where did you say you were going to spend money? Those are your only approved line items, spending categories, whatever you want to call them. And you can move money between those. You just can't add information in a new row once your grant award has been made.
And then someone had a question, Christina, is the hard to staff column based on the list for the state or data collected from the LEA?
It's a locally determined definition. So there's being hard to staff there could be a bunch of different definitions for it. So if it is a hard to staff school within your own LEA, you have high turnover at that school, you don't see a lot of transfers to that school. However you would define it in your school as hard to staff, or in your LEA as hard to staff, you're allowed to define it that way.
And then someone asked, if we're moving money between allowable categories in our grant, how do we let you know about that change? So you would just send us an email and let us know. And Christina, if it's more than 10% of their awarded funds, isn't that correct?
Correct. Yep. If it's 10% or higher, we need an email. If it's less than 10%, you can just make the move.
Yeah. But just emphasizing that it can only be moved, and like Sarah said in her comment, but just to reiterate that you can only move funds among the categories that were approved in your grant proposal and your grant in that chart in your grant application. Good questions. All right, so as we move into March, April, May, and June, previous slide, please. There we go, thank you. We're just making sure that we're going back to all the tabs that we've been working on all year and making sure that we're updating everything that we have information for. So going back and and filling in where you spent money on grant funds, where you've spent matching funds. And then that the program completion tab, you should be able to start filling this in as residents are completing your program. So those are columns C through H on that program completion tab. Again, seeking out that information on past TPAs, total number of attempts, basic skill requirements, subject matter requirements, and past feedback. Next slide. And then in July, we're asking you to finalize your report to get it sent to us by the end of the month. We'll be sending out an email to all grantees, letting them know the official due date and giving you lots of, heads up to do that. So just make sure that all of your tabs are completed for all of the residents that were enrolled in your program. So going through your program enrollment tab, program completion, how your grant funds were spent, how you spent matching funds, and then the year 1 through 4 teaching tabs as appropriate. So what we don't want, and what sometimes happens, is a lot of back and forth between us and the grantees because there's missing information. And so we go through these reports in a high level of detail, and if there's missing things, we'll highlight the cells that are missing and send it back to you. And then we go back and forth. And so we would really like to see more finalized, completed reports submitted the first time so that we don't have to keep going back and forth. All right, next slide. If you could just go to the next slide for a moment. We really wanted to emphasize the importance of having a succession plan. We know how often folks change roles within a district or move to a different district or retire or what have you. And so please let us know as soon as possible when you have a member of your grants team change for any reason. It would be great if you could introduce us to the new person and let us know. But a lot of times we don't find out folks have changed their jobs until we get an out of office message saying I'm no longer in this role or I'm no longer with the district. And then we have to try and hunt down who we can contact for the information that we need. So please let us know as soon as you know if there's going to be a change, and just send us an introductory email to teacherresgrants@ctc.ca.gov. There's 3 people who monitor that email, including Christina, myself, and Sarah. And so you will get an answer quickly because one of the 3 of us are always checking email all day, every day. So we encourage you to establish some process for your grants so that there's a document for all of the grant team members that talks about what your data collection processes are going to be, who's responsible, who those key people are at the IHE and LEA, so that and keep it in a central location so that everybody can access it, so that if there are changes in personnel, then you haven't lost that information. All right, and the next slide. So again, we're here to help you. We want this program to be successful. We want your data collection to be smooth and something that you feel capable of doing and providing to us. So contact us anytime with questions. We're more than happy to respond to email, jump into a quick Zoom call, Teams call. We get calls, a few times a week. People are just call our number and ask us questions, and we can talk through things. And that's what we're here to do. That's our job, is to help support these grant programs. So please do reach out to us at our email. The link there is for the residency grant program website that has a lot of information as well. Obviously, you're here, so you know of the resources that are available through the lab as well. And we're very excited for this grant opportunity that's been provided for a statewide teacher residency technical assistance center. So we're looking forward to working with whomever is awarded that as well. So in terms of submission, at this point, our 2018 grantees are going to be submitting their spreadsheets as always. So we're just going to continue that process for them. Our 2021 grantees, we don't know what that process is going to look like yet in terms of submitting your data. So as soon as we know what that's going to look like, we will, get the word out and send out documents or have office hours or something to walk through that process for our 2021 grantees.
Lynn, if you don't mind, I'm just going to hop in on that one. I just wanted to add that 2008 team grantees, you have access to a SharePoint folder, which is basically like a shared Google folder, where we will exchange that spreadsheet. And again, that's just for 2018 grantees. And if you have, lost track of that SharePoint folder, shoot us an email and we can, you know, share it with you again. 2021 grantees, we're not sure exactly how you're going to submit everything yet. So we'll see for what we'll be communicating that.